Greetings, tubineros. It's been a while since you tubed into me, but as I said a few months ago, I have real-time obligations that make my online appearances less common, for good or otherwise. In the New York Times, I see for July the 3rd, the Western establishment's paper of record, we see this little self-righteous piece on Chinese prisons. Captivity as a mirror of society, as experienced by a Chinese prisoner, Liao Yiwu. This article offers the metaphor of the Chinese prison as an exact replica of the outside state. China remains a prison of the mind, he informs us, one of prosperity without liberty. Our entire country might as well be gluing medicine packets all day. This is our brave new world. Mr. Lau also writes of his fellow prisoners who abandoned their dissent in order to join the system and make money. Mr. Lau, the article goes on, was invited by the Public Security Bureau to a little tea-house chat and told if he didn't shut up and join the crowd, he'd be made to disappear for quite a while. Going on to ask him, why don't you write harmless romances and get rich yourself? Beside that article is a review of the new Lone Ranger remake. Hero rides again with big boots to fill. A metaphor, I suppose, for the rough-riding freedom of our way of life and why we're unlike those evil Asiatic authoritarians. Well, in looking over the front pages of the paper of record, I'd say the present state of the world hasn't changed in essentials from my younger days, from the era of Vietnam. U Thant, the Burmese diplomat who became Secretary General of the United Nations between 1961 and 1971, stated that in the final analysis there can be no solid foundation for peace in the world so long as the superpowers insist on taking unilateral military action whenever they see a threat to their security. His words are self-evident truisms, but why is that so? Because what is to be secured is the self-interest of the dominant ruling groups of said superpowers, the ones who actually govern the machinery of state power. The threat is anything that undermines, or might undermine, or tend to undermine their dominance of their home turf and their right to project their imperial dominance abroad. This threat may be physical or ideological, anything from a ticking bomb to protest in the street to betrayal of state property, that is, state secrets, to thought crime, which, in Orwell's terms, contains the seed of all of the others and is thus the most to be feared by those that rule. As is evident from the daily workings of those who rule at home, as we witness every day in Washington and Wall Street, their dominance is based on force and fraud and is fundamentally illegitimate. It therefore follows that their will can only be enforced by criminal means at home or abroad. This illegitimacy is cloaked in the phrases of civil society, the rule of law, but as we know in practice it means the law of those who rule. Having come to power in violation of every norm of equity or legal and ethical principle, they must, of necessity, psychologically twist the very meanings of these terms to serve their self-interest. So complete is this process in their own minds that they will not admit, to you anyway, any contradiction between the rule of law and their right to violate the sovereignty of other nations, just as at home they see no contradiction between democracy and a surveillance state that monitors every aspect of their subjects' behavior short of reading their minds for thought crime, a technological capability that, we're assured, is already here, but so far too expensive to employ on a mass scale. Rest assured that while austerity may cut off the livelihoods of the majority, it will never impede the minority's subsidized power to subjugate the majority, no matter how far society is pushed into bankruptcy. But don't illegitimate rulers always force subjects to pay for their own poverty and humiliation? Or what was called in the old South Africa, dwang pastor. Keep the masses in a state of anxiety, make them realize they better do as they're told or worse is waiting. Peace for those who obey, destruction for those who don't. Or as the mafia would say, grab them by the balls and their hearts and minds will follow. So what is the existential difference between those Marxist Asiatics in Beijing and the rulers in Washington? What's their excuse? What's the difference between Liao Yiwu, whose captivity is a mirror of his society, and Edward Snowden, whose crime is to have betrayed the self-interest of those who rule, exposing it for the deceit we all know it to be? But emperors east or west don't like having attention brought to their fat, nude, pimply asses, though all see it right in their faces. They do not like to see their dirty linen laundered in the fresh air of public scrutiny because it shows how much shit the public is actually being spoon-fed under the high fructose corn syrup of the rule of law and civil society. When I use these terms in quotation marks, don't mistake my cynicism as some sort of juvenile anarchism that rejects their founding concept. Rather, the juvenile anarchism is to be found in those at the top of the social food chain, rationalizing their cannibalism, their inhuman cravings, by subverting the very concepts that make human society human. It's those who air the hypocrisy in public must be shown as the subversive, the treasonous, the seditious thought criminals. Roger Williams, the dissenting founder of Rhode Island, was in October 1635 tried by the General Court of Boston, Massachusetts, and convicted of sedition and heresy. The court declared that he was spreading diverse, new, and dangerous opinions and ordered his banishment. The sentence was delayed because Williams was sick in the approaching bad winter, so he was allowed temporary reprieve, provided he'd cease agitating the ruling powers of Boston. But since he didn't shut his yap, didn't content himself with the motto, work, eat, pray, submit, then die, in January 1636 the sheriff came to pick him up, only to discover that Williams had slipped away 3 days before during a blizzard. He walked 105 miles through deep snow and hard winter weather to the head of Narragansett Bay, where the local Taliban of the day, the Wampanoag Indians, offered him shelter. They gave him refuge in the winter camp of their chief Massasoit, in which transit terminal Williams resided for nearly 4 months. A nation that prides itself on the heritage of Roger Williams has instead become the vindictive Puritan authority that drives men into exile and hounds them even then. But in 1635, the bigots of Boston drew the line at ordering his rendition from the enemy nation in which he found shelter, nor did they even bother to threaten war against the whole nation for sheltering a subversive thought criminal. So, we see little evidence that the world is a better place, or its modern inhabitants any more enlightened or just than their predecessors. What's always made the Cuban Revolution interesting in modern times to me is that it's underscored the essential hypocrisy of those who rule Washington and Wall Street. Fidel Castro is presented as an enemy of freedom because he opposes their rule. But have you ever met a citizen of the United States out in the street who doesn't oppose the rule of the Wall Street-Washington axis? Castro touched a deep nerve in dressing up like Robin Hood, going off with his merry men into the forest, mobilizing the subjects of his local parish to not only resist its corrupt sheriff, but the usurping king who put corrupt magistrates in power, demonstrating also that without justice there is no peace, no matter how savage the pacification. This is the imagery of the Lone Ranger and the hope that makes Castro such a deadly enemy. They don't hate him because he's a communist tyrant or because he may punish dissidents at home, but because he keeps alive the positive image of Robin Hood, the man on the white horse fighting for the common folks, upturning the complacency of inherited privilege, because events like the Cuban Revolution revive the hope of overthrowing entrenched power by those on the margins, outside the circle of wealth and power, to receive the justice so long denied them. It's this dream that must be destroyed, by propaganda or by napalm, or by illegal surveillance under the rule of law that makes even the very idea of resistance inconceivable. In America, as in modern China, the hero on the white horse is rendered a harmless figure of popular entertainment, while the reality is increasingly like Mr. Lao's. Now I know there are some conscientious pricks out there who will instantly claim that Roger Williams, Fidel Castro, or Edward Snowden have nothing in common as men or in values. But these detractors couldn't be more wrong. They have the same enemies for the same reasons, and for the same reasons will always bring down the hatred of those who rule. Whatever their shortcomings, always remember that those who vilify them, who demand you do the same, are the very ones whose feet have always stood on your own neck while they hypocritically lionize a faraway Chinese dissident in the highest reaches of the official press. So, if you're telling us that the world is no better, no different, then maybe those who rule are right after all. Resistance isn't practical and futile, no matter how right it may be in the abstract. To this I say, it's good to get the gold medal, great to win the girl, but the final goal is to show those rigging the game that you're not the loser they take you for. That life is what you strive to make it, not what they dictate to you, always for your own good. Well, no matter how long I stay away, they always find me. Hello? Why, it's Henry Kissinger. A direct hotline from hell, even if it's just the devil's messenger. What you got to say about it, Henry? Utant be damned, eh? Just that the masses have to be taught that utopia is impossible, and therefore they should learn to be content with things just as they are. Because any attempt to make things better just makes them worse. So, we try to organize working people for their rights, or get health care for the sick, or education for the ignorant, or empower ordinary folk with some dignity and control over their lives, with the greatest good for the greatest number, the result will be Stalin's gulags or Pol Pot's Cambodia. which means we'll have to napalm the asses of the masses in order to save them from such an evil fate. That's the devil's bargain, Henry. No wonder you went from Secretary of the United States government to Hell's High Ambassador.